this chamber simply to uphold their commitment to America's seniors. From my listening sessions, I know that seniors don't want a voucher that forces them to buy insurance in the private market.
Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman will suspend. The House will come to order.
They don't want higher costs or reduced benefits, and they don't want some newfangled program. They want to keep Medicare the way it is, a guaranteed benefit they can count on when they need it. Seniors in my district and across the country know we have big problems, but we can strengthen and preserve Medicare without ending the guarantee. A guarantee, by the way, that is neither Republican nor Democratic, but it's an American guarantee, and I think we all need to keep that in mind and remember that. Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues in the House to join me in voting for this final amendment to preserve and to strengthen the most successful health insurance program our nation has ever created, namely Medicare. Our grandparents have stood by us, folks. I think it's time that we stand by them, and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. For purposes, the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit and strongly support H.R. 5.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2.5 years ago in this body we debated the Affordable Care Act. And I remember being part of that debate here on the House floor. And part of that debate was to increase access for American citizens and to maintain the physician-patient relationship. I have a letter here that was signed by 75 of us, both Democrats and Republicans, opposing a part because in the House version of the Affordable Care Act, the Independent Payment Advisory Board was not there. And this bill is very simple. H.R. 5 is to repeal the Independent Payment Advisory Board and to vote for malpractice reform. A very simple bill, one that should be easy to support. Let's just discuss and see what occurred. Basically, the Independent Payment Advisory Board, most seniors don't know about this. After the $500 billion has been taken out to pay for a new benefit, the Independent Payment Advisory Board are 15 unelected bureaucrats appointed by the President and approved by the Senate to oversee Medicare spending. And why does this bring angst to a physician? I practiced medicine for 31 years in Tennessee, and my concern is I've already seen 2 examples of this, and this will be the third. The first is a sustainable growth rate, a formula based on how to pay doctors in Medicare. This was established in 1997, and each year, almost every year since then, the Congress has had the ability to change this because why? We were afraid if reimbursements to physicians were cut, access to our patients would be denied. And let's look at what's going on right now. 2 weeks ago in this body, we extended the SGR for 10 months, preventing a 27% cut to physicians. Well, as a doctor, what would this mean for me in providing care for my patients? Well, what this would mean is you couldn't afford to see the patients. And with IPAB, a formula based on spending, not quality or access, what would happen, I believe, is that this would occur, this 27%, at the end of this year, a 31% cut, which would be catastrophic for our Medicare patients. So it's a very simple bill. We don't want Washington-based bureaucrats getting in between the physician-patient relationship. Medical decisions should be made between not an insurance company and certainly not 15 unelected bureaucrats in Washington. It should be made between a patient, the doctor, and that family. The second part of this bill, very simply, is medical legal malpractice reform. When I began my medical practice in Tennessee, my malpractice premiums were $4,000 a year. When I left 4 years ago to come to Congress, $74,000 a year. And during that time, from 1975 until I left to come here, there's basically one insurance company in Tennessee. And over half the premium dollars that were paid during that time went to attorneys, not to the injured party. Less than 40 cents of the malpractice premium dollar in that state have gone to people who've actually been injured. It's a very bad system. The tort system we have for medical liability now is a very bad system. It needs to be reformed. No one's ever argued about paying actual damages. No one's ever argued about paying medical bills. It's the unintended consequences of this bill that run the cost up at no value to patients. I strongly encourage my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The noes have it and the motion fails.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from
may
Iowa.
I call for a recorded vote?
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of the bill if ordered and approval of the journal if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
Votes now on a procedural motion related to legislation seeking to repeal the Independent Advisory Board within the health care law. A motion to recommit seeks to send the bill back to committee for further consideration. A spokesman for House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi says about the motion, Republicans can try to hide behind any piece of legislation they want, but they can't hide from the facts. Their goal is to end the Medicare guarantee, increase costs for seniors, and let Medicare wither on the vine. The Democrats' motion to recommit exposes the GOP latest plan, prohibits any GOP scheme to eliminate Medicare, raise costs, or reduce benefits for seniors and Americans with disabilities. Votes on final passage expected to come up shortly. This is a 15-minute vote. House Speaker John Boehner finished up his weekly briefing a short time ago, and here's what he had to say about the Republicans' agenda.
Morning, everyone. You know, gas prices are rising and Americans are frustrated with the gap between the president's words and his actions. The president now says he supports the Republican, all of the above energy strategy for our country. But for 3 years, his administration has made every effort to block, delay, and restrict new energy production in our country. He claims that he wants to address rising gas prices, but his policies are actually making matters worse for families and small businesses. And the only recent action the president has taken on energy involved lobbying senators personally and successfully to prevent construction of the Keystone Pipeline. Yet today, he's out in Oklahoma trying to take credit for a part of the pipeline that doesn't even require his approval. Now, this is what I'm calling the Obama energy gap. Up here in Canada and in North Dakota, we've got all this oil. And the president's down here in Oklahoma taking credit for a part of the pipeline that's going to go through the normal process. It's already gotten its approvals. And this idea that the president is going to expedite this will have no impact on the construction of this pipeline. Now, let me explain something. It's not just oil that's up in Canada. Right now, this year, North Dakota will become the second largest oil-producing state in our country. There are 3 100-tank trains every day that come out of North Dakota and have to go all the way to the Gulf because of the lack of this pipeline. And so it's Canadian oil, it's North Dakota oil that needs to get down to our refineries in the Gulf. So the president can take credit for having nothing to do with the bottom half of this pipeline. And the fact is there's only one permit that requires his approval because it crosses our national boundaries, and that's the Keystone decision on the upper half of this. Remember, we have 165,000 miles of pipeline in our country that operate successfully every day. The Congress earlier this year passed a pipeline safety bill to increase the safety standards on this 165,000 miles of pipeline. The president should listen to the American people and allow the Keystone Pipeline to go forward. There's a big gap between what the president promises and what he talks about and the actions that he's taking. And I think honest, hardworking taxpayers deserve actions that match the words.
Mr. Speaker, last fall you voted on a balanced budget amendment. You talked about how important it was to have a balanced budget. So why doesn't your budget come to balance for like 3 decades?
As you can see from the whole budget discussion, what's driving this are baby boomers beginning to retire. 10,000 new baby boomers every day filing for Social Security, filing for Medicare. Americans living longer, accessing Medicaid services. It's driving a big hole in the budget. That's why I was so serious about trying to work with the administration and the president last year to have a real agreement that would slow this process down and begin to deal with our deficit and our debt.
Mr. Speaker, Boehner.
Yeah.
Certain things like the budget is understandable why they're difficult to move through Congress, but there are many things like the jobs bill, which everyone seemed to, including President, liked 3 weeks ago. The transportation bill used to always be a pretty easy thing to do. Why are basically simple things so difficult to get done and make it hard to Congress?
Well, I think the jobs bill moved through the House with a broad bipartisan vote, and I expect the Senate will send that bill back, and we'll come to an agreement pretty quickly. I think when it comes to things like the highway bill, that used to be very bipartisan, you have to understand it was greased to be bipartisan with 6,371 earmarks. You take the earmarks away, and guess what? All of a sudden, people are beginning to look at the real policy behind it. And so each of these bills will rise or fall on their own merits.
Speaker Boehner. Do you expect to have 218 votes, Republican votes in the House to pass the Ryan budget plan?
That's a question for the whip, but I'm confident that we'll have the votes.
Speaker Boehner, one of your popular refrains is that you don't want to keep kicking the can down the road. The Senate passed a bipartisan 2-year transportation bill. Now your position is to have a 3-month extension of this. How is that not kicking the can down the road?
Well, the problem with the Senate bill is that it doesn't address the issue of rising gas prices and energy. We believe that if we're going to reauthorize the highway bill, American energy production ought to be a critical part of this. When you look at the budget and you see the hole in the transportation funding because there isn't sufficient gas tax receipts coming in to fund our infrastructure needs, opening up federal lands for more oil and gas production would in fact help fill that gap so that we have the money to rebuild our roads and bridges.
Yes,
dispute
in your state between the party chairman and the governor over whether he should stay out the end of the term or resign now. What do you think he should do?
I think the State Central Committee will resolve that question, and the sooner it gets resolved, the better.
I wanted to ask you about the Stock Act today moving forward in the Senate. At the same time, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington has released a report that shows...
Well, that's a real bipartisan operation.
It shows that 248 members of Congress, though, have paid family members either through their campaigns or through their official offices. And family members is close as like their spouse or even like their siblings or sons. Do you think that there's a problem with that, too, here in Congress?
Listen, I think all members should be held to the highest ethical standards. And I believe that virtually every member of Congress tries to do that. But I think that question's been out there for some time. The rules of the House make it very clear that having relatives on your official payroll is against the rules of the House. I think when it comes to the issue of campaign funds, if there's legitimate work being done, people ought to be paid for it. But I'm not aware of all of these allegations.
Mr. Speaker,
why aren't you sitting down?
Well, because the seats are taken and I need my recorders there.
Oh.
On transportation, you just described what the Senate bill lacks, but it was just last week when you told your conference that if they didn't come up with a Republican bill, it would be the Senate bill or something like it. Then you came out here and told us the very same thing. What's changed between 7 days ago and today that you're now going for a 3-month extension?
We're continuing to work with our members on how best to address rebuilding our nation's infrastructure and addressing rising gas prices and the need to have more energy production.
A week ago you said it's the Senate bill.
What's your take on the recent AP report analysis that found gas prices do not go down when domestic drilling increases?
Well, I think it doesn't pass a straight face test. And the fact is the problem is we don't have enough supply, and we've got more demand. And when you've got more demand, guess what? You're going to have higher prices. And there's no question that Americans are sick and tired of sending $500 billion of their hard-earned money to countries around the world, most of whom don't like us a whole lot, to pay for our oil that we could, and gas that we could be developing here in America. This is about an 80% issue in our country. And for 35 years, our country has not had a national energy policy. Republicans have been adamant for years that we ought to have an all-of-the-above national energy strategy. I'm for wind development. I'm for solar. I'm also for nuclear. I'm for more oil and gas development in our country. And the President has continued to block development of oil and gas reserves, big reserves, on federal lands. And he can go out and make all the noise that he wants, but the facts are there.
Do you support Mr. Cantor's plan to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank, a plan to ultimately aim to wind down that agency?
There's a lot of conversation going on about it. I think Mr. Cantor and the staff are doing good work to try to find a common ground to deal with that issue.
Mr. Speaker, can you address the iPad issue is on the floor today? We're hearing a lot of arguments about what's wrong with the health care law, specifically iPad. Are you confident that when these arguments go before the Supreme Court, that at least 5 justices next week will see things the way your party sees things on this court?
I have no idea what the Supreme Court's going to do.
On defense, on the budget. You guys say that it hollows out the budget, hollows out the defense budget. Yet under the sequester, it's going to be back above FY12 levels by FY18. So I guess the two questions are basically, A, how is that a hollowing out if it's going to be back above FY12 and FY18? And B, isn't there a danger you're creating sort of a DOD patch, just like the AMT patch or the SGR patch or extenders, that every year there will be an incentive to fill in?
You know, we should never have had the sequester. You know, remember, it was the President who insisted that the second tranche of the increase in the debt limit, that there not be a debate and there not be any action, and that basically he got to authorize the second $1.2 trillion increase in the debt limit. So that's where the problem started. I always thought that the Super Committee had a real chance to do good work, to produce savings so that the sequester wouldn't kick in. I think the sequester will hurt our Department of Defense, will hurt our ability to do what Americans believe is our most basic responsibility, and that's to provide security for the American people. I believe that Secretary Panetta believes the same thing. And for that matter, I think the White House believes that the sequester is totally unacceptable. That's why the House will act this spring to replace that sequester. And hopefully, in some time near in the future, that the Congress will really act to deal with our long-term spending problem and our deficit problem. We can't continue to spend money that we don't have. All right, Jonathan, last one.
You lost 2 Republican votes last night on the Ryan plan in the Budget Committee. Do you expect that changes will be made to that to the budget before it comes to a vote, or do you think that it's just a question of getting 218 on the Ryan plan as it is?
Let me go back a little bit, Jonathan. We're over here in the House actually working on a budget, going through the real work that it takes to come to grips with our fiscal problems. The Senate's done nothing. There have been no markups over in the Senate. There ain't been any effort in the Senate. 3 years, and they've failed to move a budget. And so when people get critical about, oh, well, you only passed the budget out of committee by 1 vote, and boy, you're going to get 218 votes when you bring it to the floor. We're actually doing the real work that's required to address our long-term problems. And I believe that we'll be successful in getting it done.
Do you change it?
Will Xavier win?
OSU or UC? OSU or UC?
UC, so I'm
The House wrapping up votes on this motion to send this legislation repealing the Independent Advisory Board back to committee for further consideration. Votes on final passage coming up. A quick reminder again that the Supreme Court will take up the constitutionality of the health care law next week. And for 3 days, the justices will hear oral argument in the case. So next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we will bring you the recorded oral argument beginning at about 2 p.m. Eastern. each day, and we'll air it on C-SPAN 3, C-SPAN Radio, and online at cspan.org. Also, Washington Journal will devote all 3 days to programming about the health care law and the court. We'll have discussions with judicial and healthcare experts, and your phone calls, your emails, and your tweets. You can see Washington Journal every morning at 7 Eastern here on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Radio, and online at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 180, the nays are 229, with 2 voting present. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed.
Speaker, on that I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
And votes now on repealing provisions of the health care law, getting rid of the independent advisory board, and capping medical malpractice awards. This is a vote on final passage. Well, a short time ago, we spoke with a reporter covering the debate over protecting access to health care legislation. Emily Etheridge writes for Congressional Quarterly. Emily, first things first, what's the purpose of the Independent Payment Advisory Board, or IPAB, that the House has been debating? And then why are House Republicans proposing to have it repealed?
The board is part of President Obama's health care law, and it's meant to restrict Medicare spending growth. So if it gets too high, if we're spending too much money on Medicare, the board would make recommendations to cut that spending. So it's a way to kind of keep the Medicare spending in check. Republicans want to do away with it because they think that it would end up limiting care for Medicare beneficiaries.
And there are also provisions regarding medical malpractice awards. How did they come to be a part of the bill?
Well, the GOP leadership decided that they would add the medical malpractice provision to the IPAB repeal bill, partially as an offset because repealing the board does score as adding to the deficit, so they needed to make up that money somehow, but also because it's just a huge priority for Republicans. It's one of the big tenets of their health care program to have medical liability changes, so they wanted to kind of get two hits in one.
What are Democrats saying about the move to add medical malpractice language to a bill repealing IPAB?
A lot of the Democrats are really upset about it. Actually, the IPAB repeal bill on its own had a few Democratic supporters. Some Democrats co-sponsored it. A lot of them voted for it in committee and were ready to vote for it on the floor as well. But once Republican leadership added this malpractice issue on top of it, Democrats said, we can't support this anymore, and they're angry that they feel that Republicans gave up a chance at a bipartisan bill.
So is there any connection between the House taking up this bill now and the Supreme Court's debate next week on the validity of the health care overhaul law?
Definitely. It's a perfect timing for them. They're, on this campaign to repeal and replace the health care law, and we've got the anniversary of the health care law this week, the Supreme Court argument starting next week, so this is really a great time for them to capitalize on that issue.
Will this bill pass today with only Republican support?
There will be a few Democrats who support it. On the rule vote yesterday, about 5 Democrats voted for the rule for the bill. Those are also Democrats, though, who voted against the health care law itself. So you're not seeing people who supported the law switching over to also support this repeal. It's people who've always been opposed to the health care law.
What's likely to happen with this bill in the Senate?
It's not going anywhere in the Senate this year. Even John Cornyn is the senator who has the companion bill in the Senate, and he told us last week that this is really an issue for maybe next year if they get more Republicans over in the Senate. But other than that, it's not going to pass.
Emily Etheridge is a staff writer for Congressional Quarterly. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
are 223, the nays are 181. With 4 voting present, the bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The Journal stands approved.
Do I have to come forward?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purpose of inquiring the Majority Leader the schedule for the week to come.
Without objection.
I thank the Speaker, and I'm now pleased to yield to my friend, the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic Whip, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at noon for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. Votes will be postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and noon for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business, and last votes of the week are expected no later than 3 p.m. No votes are expected in the House on Friday. Mr. Speaker, the House will consider a few bills under suspension of the rules, which will be announced by close of business tomorrow. The House will also consider H.R. 3309, Federal Communications Commission's Process Reform Act, authored by Congressman Greg Walden of Oregon. And for the second year in a row, the House will consider and pass a budget resolution. Mr. Speaker, we also expect to take further action on our nation's infrastructure, with authority expiring at the end of next week. Finally, I'm hopeful that the Senate will clear the House's Bipartisan Jobs Act today. This bill has been delayed too long, but I look forward to the President signing it into law. I thank the gentleman from Maryland. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his information with respect to the legislation that's going to be considered next week. I note that he talks about the highway bill, the infrastructure bill that is pending. Obviously, we had expected to consider that bill on the House floor. On our side, at least, our expectation was going to be considered a number of weeks ago. It has not come to the floor here, and as I understand it, we are now talking about an extension of some period of time. We are concerned that you rightfully, personally, and as a party, made it very clear that certainty was an important aspect of growing our economy. That's a proposition on which I agree. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that we need to create certainty, and clearly we need to create jobs. I said this morning, Mr. Leader, to the press that, and I'm sure you get it as well, that the public says to me, when are you guys going to start working together? When are you going to get something done in a bipartisan way? The Senate has done that, I say to my friend. The Senate has done it in an overwhelming fashion. They had 74. There would have been 75. Mr. Lautenberg was absent but was for the bill. So 75% of the Senate, three-quarters of the Senate, voted for what was a very bipartisan bill, and as a matter of fact, half the Senate Republicans essentially voted for that bill. It had, as you know, a technical flaw in the bill in that it had revenues which need to be initiated in the House of Representatives. Representative Tim Bishop of New York has introduced the Senate bill, which has overwhelming support in the United States Senate, and very frankly, in my view, would have at least 218 votes in this House, at least 218 votes in this House if it were put on the floor. The Speaker has said in the past that he is committed to letting the House work its will, and obviously referring to open amendments process. But obviously, if a bill doesn't come to the floor, we have no opportunity either to amend or to vote. That's been one of our problems, of course, with the jobs bill that we hope would have been brought to the floor that the President proposed. That has not been to the floor. But I asked my friend, rather than continue to delay, and both sides have done that on the highway bill, to give that confidence of which you have spoken and others on your side of the aisle have spoken, I think absolutely correctly, in order to give the confidence that we can in fact act, that we can work in a bipartisan fashion, I would ask my friend whether or not he would be prepared to bring, as the Majority Leader, to bring the Bishop bill to the floor, which again is the Senate bill, supported by 75 members of the United States Senate, half of the Republican caucus in the Senate, and which will give some degree of certainty for a highway program that clearly is also a jobs bill, which will have an impact on almost 2 million jobs and maybe another million jobs along the way. We think that's the way that would be good for our country to proceed. And it would send a message, because I think it would get bipartisan support if you brought it to the floor, that it would send a good message to the country that, yes, from time to time we can work together. And very frankly, Mr. Leader, if we did that, it would be consistent with every transportation bill that we've passed since 1956 under Dwight Eisenhower, where we work together in a bipartisan fashion. This is the first time that I've experienced a partisan divide. I mean, people have had differences of opinion. A partisan divide on the highway bill. As you know, Senator Boxer and Senator Imhoff came together and agreed. Now, that's a pretty broad ideological spectrum of the United States Senate. They came together, they agreed, and they led the effort to pass that bipartisan bill. I would very much hope that, Mr. Majority Leader, that you could bring that bill to the floor and see whether or not, in fact, it could pass. I think that would be good for the country, and I yield to my friend for his comments.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman, and I would respond by saying to him that no, I'm not prepared to bring that bill to the floor, because I differ with him in his assumption that there would be enough bipartisan support to pass that bill in the House. And from all that I know about what's in the Senate bill, there is a lot of disagreement over how that bill was constructed as far as House members are concerned. And I would say to the gentleman, our plan is very clear. We have been outspoken on this. We do not want to disrupt the flow of federal transportation dollars, which is why we'll be bringing to the floor next week a bill to provide for an extension of 90 days so that perhaps, as the gentleman would like, as would I, we could come together as two bodies and two parties on an agreement to provide more certainty. But as to the gentleman's suggestion that we need to be doing this to be consistent with what has been done historically, I would say to the gentleman, he knows as well as I that we are in very, very difficult economic times. We have never faced the kind of problems that we face today as a country from a fiscal standpoint. And unfortunately, transportation funding is no different. We're just out of money. And so we're trying to take the approach that most American families and business would take, and that is to try and spend within our means, to come up with some innovative ways to look at transportation needs and demands in the future and our being able to meet them. And we look forward to working with the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, in a bipartisan fashion to try and effect that end. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, but I will say again to the gentleman, you know, we've been down this path before. We've been down this path before where the Senate was able to reach a bipartisan agreement on legislation very important to jobs, the economy, and to the confidence of America. And that bipartisan piece of legislation would have enjoyed the support, I think, certainly the overwhelming majority, almost unanimous support on our side, and a bipartisan agreement. I don't mean a Democratic proposal from the Senate, but a bipartisan agreement that came from the Senate. That dealt, of course, with payroll taxes, extending those, and ultimately we did that. We took that bill. But I would say to my friend that the Speaker indicated he wanted a bill on this floor. I've been asking you for a number of weeks if it was going to come to the floor for approximately a month now. That bill hasn't come to the floor. We all know it hasn't come to the floor because there's very substantial disagreement within your party about that bill. The papers report that. Everybody talks about it. We understand that. I say to my friend that he and I do have a disagreement. I think it would enjoy bipartisan support on this floor if you brought the Bishop bill, the Senate bipartisan bill, to the floor. But the only way we're really going to be able to find that out, not by me saying I think it would, you saying I think it wouldn't, there's a very easy way to see whether it would. and that is to bring it to the floor next week. The gentleman is absolutely correct. I don't think there's anybody, hopefully, that wants to disrupt and have literally hundreds of thousands of people thrown out of work or not have opportunities for work. We know the construction trades in particular have been very badly hit by the lack of construction that's going on, so that you can have your opinion, I can have my opinion, but there is a way to determine whether or not, in fact, we can get bipartisan agreement, and that is, as I said, the Speaker has indicated, let the House work its will. The only way the House can work its will, having been Majority Leader, is for the Majority Leader to bring the legislation to the floor for a vote. Then you may be right, I may be right, but we will know. It won't have to be speculation. We will know, and if I'm right and we do pass that bill, then next week, before March 31st, before the expiration of the current highway authorization, we can send a bill to the President of the United States, and he will sign the Senate bill. We don't know that he will sign a bill that you know, is still languishing in your committee, because we haven't seen the final parameters of that bill, because it's obviously pretty controversial on your side of the aisle. So I would hope, again, if you want certainty, we have an opportunity for certainty. We have an opportunity with a bipartisan bill that the Senate's passed. I don't know why we're rejecting that bipartisanship. I know we have, as a matter of fact, the gentleman says, well, this is a unique economic time. He's right. It seems to me that's a greater argument for trying to embrace bipartisan agreement and move forward with giving certainty to the construction industry, to states, to municipalities, to counties, on what is going to be available to them to plan and to pursue infrastructure projects critical to commerce and to their communities. So I regret that the gentleman has indicated that that's not an option that he will consider, but a short-term extension seems to be the continuation of uncertainty, not the allaying of uncertainty. I don't know whether the gentleman wants to make another comment on that or not.
Mr. Speaker, I would just say to the gentleman, I guess we're going to agree to disagree. We're dealing with the reality that we don't have the money, and we're trying to fashion a path forward that both sides can agree upon. Obviously, we cannot agree upon that next week with all the differences that still exist, which is why we are creating the construct of a 90-day extension, then giving us the possibility to get into conference with the Senate to try and produce a longer-term transportation funding bill. And I yield back.
Well, I won't pursue it any further, Mr. Leader, but you've been unable to get agreement within your party on this side of the Capitol for well over a month. I hope you can get there. I would hope you would get there in a bipartisan fashion so that Mr. Rahal and Mr. Micah could agree on a bill, which has been my experience in the 31 years I've been here. It's not my experience this year. That hasn't happened. But almost invariably, and I think for the years you've been here, you've experienced that as well. Let me ask you now, with respect to the budget, do you expect the budget to come to the floor? You indicated that. And if so, would that be Wednesday?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, the gentleman is correct. We will be beginning debate on the budget Wednesday and likely concluding that debate and vote on Thursday.
Normally, as you know, we've had alternatives made in order. We, of course, want to make in order an amendment which will guarantee that Medicare will be available to our seniors and that we will not decimate Medicaid, which we think is appropriate for our seniors. And we also want to make sure that we have revenues that can sustain health care for seniors, education for kids, help for our communities. Will the gentleman be able to tell me whether or not, in fact, alternatives will be made in order by the Rules Committee that would be offered either by the minority ranking member of the committee and/or others, as has historically been the case?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman, yes, we expect that to be the case. Obviously, I disagree with his characterization of our budget. We are, in fact, saving the Medicare program in a bipartisan fashion. And I yield back.
Was there a bipartisan vote in the committee on that? I thought it was a totally partisan vote in the committee. Was I incorrect on that?
Gentleman yield?
Yes, I certainly yield.
Mr. Speaker, I'd say the gentleman knows very well of what I refer to, that the disproportionate cause of our deficit has to do with health care entitlements. And we actually, as the gentleman knows, last year and this year are proposing a solution, a plan, that does not resolve the issue overnight, but it puts us on a path towards balancing the budget. And this year, our budget chairman has worked together with the senator from Oregon on the gentleman's side of the aisle in the Senate to propose a solution that responds to some of the complaints about the path that was taken before. And again, it is a bipartisan solution. It is a plan to save Medicare. And unlike the gentleman's party, nor his president, we are actually posing a solution to the problem and saving the program for this generation and the next. So again, I'm sure the gentleman disagrees with my characterization, I with his, but to answer his question, to get back on track as far as the schedule and the fashion in which these bills are going to be brought to the floor, yes, consistent with precedent, we will be allowing full substitutes to be offered on both sides of the aisle.
I thank the gentleman for his comment. Last thing I would ask the gentleman, am I correct that the agreement that was reached between our parties, which led to the passage of the Budget Control Act in a bipartisan fashion, does not reflect the substance of that agreement as it relates to the discretionary spending number for fiscal year 2013? Senator McConnell is quoted, as you know, as saying that that was an agreement that was reached and that he expected to be pursued. He was not, I want to make it clear, he was not referring to the action of the Budget Committee, but he was referring to the agreement on the discretionary number. Am I correct that that number is not being the agreement that was reached in order to get a bipartisan vote on the Budget Control Act, which we passed, which made sure that this country did not default on its debts for the first time in history? Am I correct that that number is not the number that is reflected in the budget? I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I'll respond to the gentleman by saying it is our view that the agreement reached in August at the top line was that, a cap. And we all know we've got to do something about spending in this country.